Dr. Joan Borosenko is a respected scientist, licensed clinical psychologist, gifted therapist, and best-selling author. Trained in cell biology, she received her doctorate from Harvard Medical School. She is a pioneer in the field of mind-body health and well-being and has inspired millions of listeners and readers to achieve their life goals.
Thanks. Thanks so much for coming. You should all get a chance to be applauded for like that. It does a lot for your immune system, let me tell you. We've come here today to talk about our crazed, busy life, where so many of us feel completely imprisoned by the to-do list. And you're nodding, so I know that's true. Sometimes you think what on earth the purpose of life is, to get everything done. And then, as my good friend Loretta LaRoche says, your tombstone will say, got it all done, dead anyhow. So we have to figure out how we can get the to-do list done and live to tell about it. How we can live with a sense of joy and a sense of peace and a sense of community and a sense of creativity, so that when we get up in the morning we can say, I'm so glad to be alive. I can't wait for what's happening next. Now, I've got good news for you. The peace and the joy you seek is not something outside of yourself. It's not something that you have to look for here and look for there and say, gee, I'll be peaceful when I get the report done. Or I'll be really peaceful if I lose the 10 pounds off my thighs. It's something that exists inside of us every moment. And all we have to do is part the clouds of busyness and care and concern that cover that joy and creativity and peace that really are the essence of what it is to be human. Now, these days, it's really common for people to say, yes, I'm on the search, I'm on the journey for inner peace, and to really do their best to get there. The trouble is this. We think, okay, what could I do to get inner peace? Maybe I could learn to meditate. And if that's good, maybe I could take a yoga class. And if that's good, maybe I could learn some of these Tai Chi exercises. That would be good. Maybe I could get up at 3 in the morning and then I could finish all these inner peace exercises by noon. This would be great. And then you know what happens? We don't do anything. You give it all up. I can tell you what my motto is right now. Do what you can, not what you won't. It's small steps. If you can learn to breathe, which we'll do together, if you do a meditation that lasts for 2 minutes, if you can adopt an optimistic attitude that you take with you all the time, that's it. It shouldn't take any extra time to have peace of mind in our busy world. It really is a matter of figuring out what is going on in your mind and learning to manage your mind, to take control of that, to come into the moment. And you don't have to be a hermit or a yogi to do it. Now, the ordinary busy life, we all know what it's like. I got up a couple of weeks ago. I made the coffee. I poured my first cup. I rushed to get my email. I fought with the computer. There's almost nothing worse than a computer that turns against you, is there? There's just something, unbelievable. And so I rushed back to get my second cup of coffee. The coffee pot is gone. I can't believe it. I'm thinking, who was so desperate that they came in here and stole my coffee pot? How could that have happened? And then I start to ask my secretary, have you seen the coffee pot? This is when you know you've lost it. You've gone over the edge. Finally, she comes into the kitchen to help. She opens the cabinets, and I have actually put it back in the cabinet with the mugs. This is a cue. This is when you say, I'd better take some time out to retrench here and make another plan. I better do a little bit of deep breathing. I better step back. I better find my peaceful center before there's a wake of trouble that follows me. And that's what happens often, isn't it true? We get so busy that we misplace the coffee pot, or we have no time to listen to our loved ones. I think that's the very worst. Some of you here have probably heard the term compassion fatigue. It often happens to people who are in service kinds of jobs. And they're there because they care about people. They love people. They want them to be healthy, to be happy, just like we do with our families. But we get so busy that we end up thinking, I don't have time to listen to you. And suddenly the very people that we love the most and want to serve the most end up being pains in the butt. That's the really, really difficult thing. And once again, I had an awareness that this happens in my life too. My husband, Kurt, who's sitting over there, the one who looks like Albert Einstein. Kurt and I went to an antique store. I wanted a little stand because I have this beautiful statue of Kuan Yin, who's the Chinese bodhisattva of compassion. So you look at her and you're supposed to think, I could be peaceful. My nature is kindness. And in the store, there was a really pretty stand, and it was made of lemon wood, which, being a thin tree, is irregular. And every one of the legs was actually a different color. It had an interesting history. And the man was telling us about the history and telling us about the history. And my inner dialogue is going something like, God, I wish he'd shut up. I just want to get out of here. I have to go back to the house. I have things to do. I have books to sort. I have reports to write. I have things to do. And then he says, the person who brought this stand in for sale, I know it has a wonderful story behind it. I'll have her give you a call. And I'm thinking, no, 1,000 times no. And at the same time, a piece of me is saying, isn't this what I really long for? Isn't this what I'm missing? The sense of community? The sense of somebody will call you up and tell you the story of an antique? And once again, I thought, got to do something to help myself and help other people, because the world is so busy that what we long for, to fill our hearts, to fill the sense of emptiness we have when we get so lonesome because we're so busy, well, what can you do? We have to make time for it. Now, I have good news about taking the time to relax. When I used to run the mind-body clinic, some of you actually know where that clinic was. It was at actually 2 different Harvard teaching hospitals. People would come in and they would say, learn to relax? If I learn to relax, I'll never get the to-do list done. I will lose my edge and I will turn into a sloth. And nothing could be further from the truth. Turns out that learning to relax can make you more efficient. And I'm going to demonstrate how stress affects productivity, because you've all had the experience where a deadline is looming and suddenly you're removed from slothhood and you can produce incredible amounts. I've had that so many times writing a report, and I always think, thank God for deadlines, because they make me do miracles. Suddenly they take dissipated energy and it makes you coherent and focused. So you got to pretend that I'm a piece of graph paper. Can you do that? And here is the x-axis, and here is the y-axis. A bell-shaped curve shows you, as you start to get more and more stressed, you start to get more and more productive till you're at the top of the curve. But when panic sets in, you slide right off the other end. And those are the days at the office when you walk around with a pile of papers in your hand looking dazed. And you say to everybody, Have you seen my work? Have you seen my work? And of course, that's what happens when we get too busy. We lose our efficiency. And yet, that's how we're expected in our society to be able to work, to keep up that pace all the time. Now, the amazing thing is, many of us are working somewhere near the top of the curve, but we are over the edge. And when you're over the edge, physiologically, what happens is you're getting burned out. You're using your adrenal glands, you're pumping yourself full of adrenaline, your eyes are red, your lips are cracked, your tongue is parched as you're racing to the finish line. And what's happening to you actually is that all of that adrenaline and also cortisone truly is burning out your body. It burns out your immune system, it stresses your heart, and then you find, gee, I've lost my health to this chronic state of busyness. The good news is that you can learn to shift back from that descending limb of this Yerkes-Dodson curve, as it's called, to the front part of the curve, where you're getting just as much done, but you're not burning out your body. In fact, you're energizing yourself. As you all know what that feeling is when you feel like, I'm in the zone, I'm centered, I'm on target, all systems are go, but you feel thrilled by life, inspired by life, almost as if inspiration were coming from some larger source. And that's when you look at whatever you've created and you go, wow, where did that come from? Did I actually do that? That happens to me sometimes when I write. I can't believe it, that these ideas came out of me. So I figure they really didn't. They really came through me. But the reason they were able to come through me is I got out of that stress zone where you really are, you might create, boy, but it's taken every last mitochondria in your cell to accomplish this. And I've shifted myself to that place that, oh, some people call their center. And that's the state of inner peace. That's the state we're looking for. That's the state, too, when we feel so joyful and so connected to life. And that's the state when the guy in the antique store says, let me tell you a story about this. And you go, wow, I'd love to hear your story. So that's what we're really, really aiming for. And that's why a little bit of relaxation can make you a lot more productive and help you last in the long run. Now, one of the keys to relaxation is breathing. When we're tense, what happens is that you tend to breathe from your chest. You lock up your diaphragm, which is the main muscle of breathing. And chest breathing actually elevates your heart rate and it makes you feel anxious. So how many times, I wonder, during the day do you yawn or sigh? In a stressed society, you can hear the sighing echoes up and down the corridors, sighing, sighing. That's the body's natural way of releasing stress. Because when you sigh, you stop breathing with your chest muscles, and it resets your diaphragm so that after a big sigh, your next breath comes from the belly. If you've ever watched a baby sleep, it's like there's a little balloon in there. It expands and contracts. Breathe in, it expands. Breathe out, it contracts. That will actually reduce your heart rate, reduce your blood pressure, make you feel more relaxed, and elicit what my former colleague, Dr. Herbert Benson, the Harvard cardiologist, calls the relaxation response, the body's opposite of the stress response. So I want you to give this all a try now. Take a deep breath. Big sigh. As the next breath comes in, just allow your belly to puff out. And as you breathe out, just feel it relax. And that's all you need to do. If you want, you can even add a little verbal reminder, like when you breathe in, peace. When you breathe out, relax. And then it's just a matter of becoming aware. And the great thing about breathing is it doesn't take any extra time. Right? You have to do it anyhow. Throughout the day, when you say, there I am, I'm off the edge of the curve, I've become homicidal, you say to yourself, I could take a breath. I could choose peace. And you go, ah. And if you just take 4 or 5 breaths, do you know that's a key to peace of mind? It's been written about since thousands of years before the birth of Christ in something called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, that the breath is the key to the mind-body interaction and the key to inner peace. Now, when you breathe like that, the other thing it reminds you to do is be in the moment. Be here now. It was John Lennon who said, life is what's happening to us while we're making other plans. And the busier you get, the more you're living in past and future. Did I say everything I had to say in that phone conversation? Gosh, I wish I'd said it differently. Did I get it done? Ugh, my to-do list is huge. What am I going to do? Will I finish all these things by tomorrow? And we end up living in a perpetual state of somewhere where we're beside ourselves, literally. We're out of our own lives. I was reading a magazine article about saving time a couple of years ago, and it had this idea. When you shower, wash your hair only once and not twice, and this will save time. Said, like, we are getting desperate. And that made me think. Rushing through the shower, I tried it, like the Indy 500. It was like going through a car wash. And emerging at the end like the scene in Psycho, as if Mad Norman had been waiting in there. And I thought, that's not the purpose of a shower. A shower is one of the most beautiful, sensual, relaxing parts of the day. But the idea is that we've been taught to multitask. You're supposed to read a magazine while you eat, or watch the news while you eat. While you shower, you can plan your day and answer your emails in your head. I can remember there are times in the shower when the only way I could remember did I or did I not shave my legs was by reaching down and seeing, because I was somewhere else. I was everywhere but in the moment. These days, the term for coming back into your own self and into your own life is an ancient term called mindfulness. And to be mindful means to be present in the moment. One little thing you can do to be mindful in the shower is to say, this is all I will do. I will not plan my day. I will be present and enjoy this. And you can just say to yourself, let me savor the sensations of the warm water, of the suds. Your mind is going to wander, because it always will. But when it does, you just bring it back. Be here now. Here I am in the shower. And sometimes I even imagine that the water coming down is like a waterfall of light and of energy that revives me, that washes through me, that takes away the fatigue and makes me new, to greet the day with the absolute best that I have. And it's not just in showering, it's really in any activity. You could eat while you eat. Make love while you make love. Do what you're doing one thing at a time. And that way, you will enjoy your life. So let me tell you just a little story of mindfulness. There was a friend of mine who died of AIDS several years ago. And what a great, wonderful, beautiful human being he was. And I was visiting him. He had a giant Christmas cactus that was in bloom. And it was covered with flowers which they bloom very briefly. they're gone in about 24 hours. Some of you are nodding because, you know, they get kind of goopy, and then they turn to rice paper almost, and they flutter down. Well, I, Miss Recovering Perfectionist, who hates to see dirt in any form, see it, and I'm thinking, my God, poor Jay is going to have to pick up this big mess off the floor. I'll just pick off all the dying blooms. I'll save him the trouble, and there I am. And he comes over and he says, Joni, I really appreciate what you're trying to do for me. But the truth is, everything has its life cycle. Everything has a birth and a death. And the flowers, to me, are no less beautiful in their dying than they are in their blooming. And so, please just let them be. I don't mind cleaning up the mess. And I thought, how typical that is, that we don't take time to enjoy the full cycle of life. We're not mindful, because our idea is on clean up the mess, go to the next thing. So Jay taught me patience. And I have to say, he's the person I pray for more than anybody, because I have 2 Christmas cactuses. And they bloom a couple times a year, and every time I rush over, I think, no, I won't do this. And I send up a little prayer for my friend, who was so beautiful and such a great teacher of patience. If you want to be mindful and in the present moment, I have one more small step you can take that has such a big payoff, and that is gratitude. There is a wonderful Cistercian monk whose name is Brother David Steindl-Rast. What a book he wrote. It's called Gratefulness, the Heart of Prayer. And somebody asked him in an interview, how is it that you're so mindful? You are so present. You are just a space of possibility that greets the world with love. And they said to him, is it because of prolonged meditation? And he said, it's really because of gratitude. Every night before I go to bed, I thank God for one thing that I've never been grateful for before. So I thought, good kind of idea, I'll try it. For a month, this is really easy. Then you start running out of stuff. And if you know you have to do this, then all day long you're thinking about things. Gee, I've never been grateful for that shadow on the building before. I've never been grateful for walking down the mall and seeing the incredible smile on the face of that particular child before. And if you practice gratitude, it will keep you mindful. It will reduce your stress. It will bring you into the heart, prevent you from burning out, so that you can show up with all the love and kindness you are to all of the people who love you. Each one of us knows how we would ideally like to be. The trouble is that there's a little diabolical voice that lives in the machine. And that little diabolical voice has been called the dirty tricks department of the mind. We think, gee, I would like to be peaceful, but then 40 or 50 causes for worry immediately come up, and we take the bait and we start to worry. Do you know, I read an incredible statistic. I couldn't believe it. 75% of the average person's thinking is negative. Isn't that amazing? But truly, most of us aren't really very good at watching our internal dialogue. Unless you're Woody Allen, then you make whole movies based on your internal dialogue. But we edit it. Sometimes a friend will really tell you, if they're a good friend, hey, you're stuck in being negative. And you know, you didn't even notice it yourself. One of the keys to inner peace is becoming aware of your inner dialogue, because that awareness gives you a choice to think differently and to overcome the dirty tricks department of the mind. I find that just labeling what goes on in the dirty tricks department is really a big help. And there's a psychologist whose name is Albert Ellis, and he coined some fabulous ideas for what goes on in your head. He calls the kind of worrying that I do a lot awfulizing. And that is, of course, when a job doesn't come in, maybe that I was expecting, something like this, and instantly I see my children on the mall with begging bowls, or I get a headache, and soon I've worked it into a brain tumor. I'm feeling weakness and tremors in my extremities. That's awfulizing. And of course, doesn't the mind do that? You pick on one thing, and the very laser focus that gives the mind its power turns against you. Now, the best way to stop awfulizing is to, in fact, notice what you're doing and just label it. Ugh, I'm awfulizing. Then what do? Said, I could take a breath. Big sigh. And you come back. Here I am. I'm in this moment. This is a perfectly good moment. The children are not begging. I am not dying. I'm sitting in my nice warm living room surrounded by the people that I love. I could be here now, and there you are. Now, another way to overcome the dirty tricks department of the mind is to learn something about being an optimist. I always thought I was an optimist, but the fact was I was kidding myself. I was raised by a woman with a PhD in catastrophizing, and apparently it rubbed off on me. So I now, consider myself a recovering pessimist. I want to tell you a little story about the difference between optimism and pessimism. Psychologists identify optimists and pessimists by how they respond to bad things that happen. Because we all have inconveniences in our life. And the bad thing might be getting stuck on the expressway. That's enough. It doesn't have to be something huge like some life-challenging situation. But we have frustrations every day in our busy world, which will tell us, am I an optimist or a pessimist? So, sitting over here next to Albert Einstein are my two sons, Justin and Andre. And when they were growing up, we lived in Scituate, Massachusetts, not far from the North River. Who knew? It's a tidal river. It's quite a dangerous river, big currents. And we had gotten a motorboat. And we decided to take the boat out. And there we were. Justin and Andre and Natalia was with us. We're tooling down the river, and there are barrels floating. Red ones, green ones, red ones. And I'm looking at the boys, and I'm saying, what are these floating barrels? And they're saying, we don't know what they are. So we get out into the ocean. We have a marvelous afternoon. It's getting late now, 4 o'clock, 4:30. Sun's going down, we're getting a little chilled, we're a little cold, and we're zooming back down the North River when we go aground on a sandbar. Now, this is one of life's little events that will tell you how you think. If it wasn't television, I would repeat for you the mantra that years of spiritual practice brought to my lips. But apparently I don't have to, because you know this. So there we were. Now, what comes to my mind? What comes to my mind is, oh no. Now we've run aground. This is a terrible situation. It's all my fault. It's all my fault because it must have had to do with the barrels, of which I was ignorant. What kind of mother takes her children boating who knows nothing about barrels? In fact, you are such a rotten mother that you missed the last 3 PTA meetings. By the time I finished, I thought a firing squad was too good for me. And I was in a terrible frame of mind. And I figured we would never be rescued, that we were stranded there until we were just bleached skeletons upon the beach. So in this state of mind, I was awakened from my toxic reveries by Justin, who was about 14 and awash in a tide of testosterone. He was making little crowing noises from the back of the boat, little pleased noises. And I look and I said, Justin, what is it? And he says, this is the best day of my life. This is the best day of my life. And I'm going, why? And you said, Justin, because now I get to rescue you. And he really did, because pessimistic people are not highly creative. Optimistic people are much more creative. It took them about 30 seconds to get us out of there. As I recall, you said, step out of the boat onto the sandbar, and once we were there, you had us all push the boat off the biggest part of the sandbar, step back in, and then you cast the anchor into the channel and pulled us out to it. You cast the anchor out a couple times, and pretty soon we were quite well aware of what the barrels meant. And happily on our way home. Now, let me unpack this little story in terms of the optimist, Justin, and the pessimistic mother. A psychologist by the name of Martin Seligman talks about pessimism as the way that we, attribute meaning to events. The meaning that pessimists attribute, he calls the 3 Ps. That is, they take things personally. All my fault for running aground, they take things personally. Secondly, they think in a pervasive way. Not only did I not know about barrels, I'm a bad mother. That's pervasive. And they also think the situation is permanent. Because truly, if you think you are a loser today, actually you're likely to think that that's always going to be the case. So what Seligman says the war cry of a pessimist is I mess up everything I do. It's all my fault, and it's the story of my life. Personal, permanent, and pervasive. Now, if you can just remember the 3 Ps, you'll notice your inner dialogue the next time you're doing it, and that awareness will give you the capacity to make a different choice. So what choice do you make? The way Justin was thinking is what Suzanne Willette, another psychologist, says has to do with stress hardiness and optimism. The 3 Cs. So he saw sitting on a sandbar not as a threat, but as a challenge. That's the first C. The second C is a sense of control, because although he knew you can't always control the outside circumstance, to him that was cool, because the control comes from inside, from saying, I'll rescue us. So we have challenge, control, and the third C is commitment. And commitment has to do to what do you commit yourself to in life? What is your vision? What is important to you? What is your meaning? What is your purpose? And I think Justin's commitment was at that time, and I hope still, honey, that life is about learning, that every single event that happens, positive or negative, can be great because you learned something. And if you have that commitment to that overarching point of view, you can be an optimist. Now, my next statement is so corny that I can hardly stand it. But it will help you remember how to stay peaceful by making the shift from pessimism to optimism. You have to stop peeing on yourself and learn to see things differently, okay? And that's how you manage the dirty tricks department of your mind. One other little piece of this is, before you finally make it to optimism, you can adopt an inner mentor. You can think, how would somebody act who really is an optimist? And this might surprise you, Justin, but oftentimes when I get into my wimpy worst self, I really say to myself, what would Justin do in this situation? Yeah. I have a wonderful friend, Janet Quinn, and oftentimes when something happens, I say, what would Janet do? Or a couple of great friends here, Robin Kasarjan, Cheryl Richardson, and I say, what would they do in this situation? Do you do that too, some of you? It's an amazing thing to have an inner mentor. There's an old saying, fake it till you make it, and that's what it's about. I have one more inner peace trick for you about imagining, about really thinking, how serious is a situation? Because we get ourselves into situations where we think, oh my goodness, this is awful, and it really isn't. So Andre, this is my other beautiful son. Do you remember last Christmas we were baking that chocolate cake to bring to Chris and David's house? Oh yes. This was a big Martha Stewart day. And we did everything. We warmed up the eggs to room temperature. We cooled down the chocolate because we were making the perfect chocolate cake. However, we changed the size of the cake pan, number one. And number two, we live practically as high up as Mars, where we live on a mountaintop at almost 9,000 feet, where the laws of physics are different than they are, and cakes rise differently. Knowing this, I set the timer 7 or 8 minutes before the cake was due, and when the buzzer ran off, Andre ran to the oven, and he stuck in a toothpick, and then I heard something like, bad news. Really bad news. The cake is vaporized. Then you said something like, possibly we could peel off the top, the bottom, and the sides of the cake and frost the crumb that remains. But the next part was the best, because their uncle, Uncle Alan, has always had this saying called terrible thing. When something happens and it really isn't so terrible, he starts to kid you by saying terrible thing. So all of a sudden I hear a chorus of, the cake is burned, the cake is burned.
Terrible thing.
But then they didn't leave me alone. Then Justin chimes in something like, and breakfast, she only makes 20 strips of bacon for 4 people. What a crummy establishment. I don't know. I don't know why we even bother coming home. And then they chanted,
Terrible thing.
And then Kurt says, and she gets a new puppy. It's her turn to take it out. And what does it do? It pees on the floor. And so pretty soon we were doing what we're all doing, and that is we're laughing. And the stress dissipated. That's called exaggerating the negative. Exaggerating the negative. And then you see, it was never such a terrible thing. Last little dirty tricks department of the mind overcomer that I wanted to mention is just the art of reframing. That's all, changing your frame of reference. It's amazing, when you're most busy, that's exactly when the new puppy goes on the rug. It's Murphy's Law, isn't it? But at that moment, it's up to you, because you're torn between the need to love the puppy and the desire to strangle this beautiful new puppy. And it's all in how you look at it. When you think, it's just a puppy. I love it. This puppy loves me. It licks me in the face. It lowers my blood pressure. It does good things for my immune system. Suddenly, the fact that it went on the rug is not nearly so important. It's always the frame of reference through which we see things that really makes a difference. And we can choose that. It's a matter of, we have little glasses through which we see the world. Being in a traffic jam on a busy day. How many of you have felt just horrible? You can feel your blood pressure rise, your heart rate going up, inner peace has evaporated because you're stuck in the traffic. That's when you begin to think the world is against you. All of the traffic lined up just because you were there, right? Now, you can look at it a different way. All alone in your car, a chance to relax, a chance to what? Take that big sigh of relief. Take a few breaths. And there's that old affirmation, I could choose peace instead of this, from A Course in Miracles. And you could. Could be a wonderful time to listen to music. Could be a wonderful time just to breathe and be mindful and be present. It's your choice. And that's always the bottom line, that life is going to be busy, life is going to be difficult. We can't always change what comes into our life, but we can always choose the frame of reference through which we look at it and approach it with a little bit of compassion, a little bit of good humor, an ability to exaggerate the negative and find the positive through that. There's an old saying, a great refrain. I don't know who said this, but I've loved it, and it's this: everything is okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. I want to talk about taking care of yourself, because what I found is that the busier we get, the less time we have to really take care of ourselves, and that so many of us put ourselves absolutely last on our own to-do list. My friend here, Cheryl Richardson, would call this extreme self-care, learning to take care of ourselves. And a friend of mine by the name of Tina Lear, who is an incredible musician, gave me one of the greatest lessons in self-care one summer when we were all getting together on a beautiful island in the Pacific Northwest, a whole group of friends that comes together every summer. And the particular night that we began our kind of friendship week, Tina came in all harried and hassled, and it was a storytelling night. This is fun if you've never done it. Get together with a group of friends, and anybody who wants to can have 3 minutes to tell a story from your life. You'd be surprised at how long 3 minutes is. So Tina decided to tell a story about herself the day before, when she was so hassled and busy trying to get out a CD that she didn't think she was even going to get a chance to come to the gathering. And I've done that many times. I've ended up working instead of doing what I really wanted to do in my heart, given up time with family and friends just to get the to-do list done. And we have to remember, the to-do list will exist after you're dead. It's immortal. It just keeps growing. But she had this epiphany, this amazing epiphany. She was rushing around getting everything done, and suddenly she said, what if Thich Nhat Hanh lived inside me? What if my body was host to him? And Thich Nhat Hanh is the archetype of inner peace. He's a meditation teacher, a Buddhist monk, a peacemaker. You figured this man never had a stressful moment in his life. So peaceful. And she said, if Thich Nhat Hanh lived inside me, would I really refuse to let him go to the bathroom just because I was too busy? If I were host to Thich Nhat Hanh, and he'd been working all day, and here it was, the summer in all of its abundant beauty, and he wanted to take a mindful, relaxing walk, would I hold him prisoner because the Xeroxing wasn't finished? And then she thought, when it got to be 10 at night and he was exhausted, would I refuse to let him go until the last stamp had been licked? And then she realized somebody dear and precious did live inside of her. Why is any of us any less precious than Thich Nhat Hanh or Martin Luther King or Mother Teresa or the Buddha? Someone so precious lives in you. And yet, I think for many of us, we treat ourselves as if we don't matter at all. So I thought of that story many, many times when I've gone crazy with busyness, and it brings me back to sanity. And I think, how would I treat someone dear and precious? And I could do that for myself. There have been many times in my life when I've been quite peaceful. And because I'm human, there are times that things conspire and I go off the deep edge. I've fallen off the Yerkes-Dodson curve. I've forgotten to breathe. You're all breathing. And one of the difficult things, I think, is the more stressed we are, the less likely we are to remember what we know. And we tend to go a little bit nutty and forget it all and start a big downhill slide. A couple of years ago, I had a time like that. Everything was melting down on every front of my life, and I felt really depleted. So I showed up at a beautiful place, Maho Bay. I was part of a conference in Maho Bay, which is absolutely gorgeous on the Caribbean island of St. John. And I met a wonderful woman there called Dr. Donna, who actually became my personal coach for a year and really helped me look at my life and look at my priorities. Dr. Donna introduced me to a great concept called the well scale, as in how full is your well. Now, if you want to measure your stress levels, there's a zillion scales out there. You know what they find? Really the simplest scale, and one that's as good as any other, is just to say this: on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed are you? And guess what? People actually know. They can tell you. So much for millions of dollars of scale development. So what Donna did is just said, how full is your well? If 10 is full and 0 is empty? It was easy for me. I said, Donna, I'm sucking mud. And, you know, it's that matter of awareness again. Awareness. Because oftentimes we are sucking mud or close to it, but we're too busy to notice. I'll notice that I'm sucking mud when I'm in the hospital, dead from the stress of it. It's good to notice a little bit before. What I've noticed now, working with this for a while, is when my well gets lower than a 7. That's when I've gone over the edge of the Yerkes-Dodson curve. And that's when, unless I do something to push myself back and up a little bit, I'm going to go into a rapid downhill slide. It's the danger zone, the red flag zone, the alarms are ringing zone. So then I said, I am going to make a list of the things that fill my well again. Now, I spend most of my life, it seems, on airplanes. And I hear several times a week the stewardess saying, please secure your own oxygen mask first before you secure the one next to you. And I think that really is a good analogy. You can't take care of the people who depend on you if you're an absolute wreck yourself. There's just no doubt about it. It's not selfishness, it's self-care. You want to have a heart of compassion and kindness and goodness to extend to others. You can't do it when you're sucking mud. So the oxygen list I made up for myself is something that you can all make up for yourselves. What gives you energy? What gives you joy? I know for me, taking a walk makes all the difference in the world. And it's really easy to get so busy in the office that I don't think of doing it. But if I say to myself, this is one small step, I could do this one little thing. I could go out into the daylight. Guess what? All of a sudden we find out, my, sunlight does something to your pineal gland. You manufacture more melatonin and you sleep. It raises your serotonin levels so that you're less depressed. If scientists would have just listened to our grandmother, we could have saved a fortune. But it's like we have to have the data now before we do these obvious things. Taking a walk is a great thing to do for me. Little things, eating a well-balanced meal that actually tastes good. What do you think that happens when you are as stressed as can be and you add the all ham hocks diet to your already busy life? This is not good for you. And the all bean sprouts diet isn't good either. There were a couple of studies done that showed, 2 studies, that men with the lowest cholesterol levels had the highest suicide rates. Interesting. Now, I think women with the lowest cholesterol levels might have the highest homicide rates. But, you know. Sometimes I think, has common sense totally deserted us? You need to eat a well-balanced diet that does have fat and, thank God, carbohydrates and protein in it. And those little things about nutrition seem so obvious, but they give you oxygen. That runs your body. That's what helps keep your well full. Touch, that's a big one. There's a whole scientific literature on touch. A little bit of touch, it releases growth hormone, and that restores your tissues. A little bit of touch, it releases serotonin, and that chases away depression and stabilizes your mood. People need to be touched. That's why spending time with even an animal, there's a great source of touch. Having a chance, even touching each other in the audience here, that little casual touch makes you feel better. And then, for me, music is one of the things at the top of the scale. If I need inspiration, I put on Mussorgsky, the March from the Great Gate of Kiev, you know, pictures in an exhibition. Da, 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 da. Isn't that great? And suddenly, boom, you are ready to go. Or Mozart, or Beethoven, or Scarlatti. There's such beautiful music out there. And now, of course, we have all kinds of research. Synchronizes the sides of the brain, makes you smarter, increases your spatial learning, but it fills your well. Now, we've talked about so many different ways to come back to inner peace, and none of them are brain surgery. Some of them are brain chemistry. All these little things really do change your brain chemistry, but they're simple things. You don't have to be a hermit. Remember to breathe. Use reframing. Use awareness of what goes on in your mind to make a choice. Remember to be in the moment. And the idea here is to take a small step. And what my hope is that each one of you today will identify one small step that you could take toward inner peace and actually do it. Remember, at the beginning of our time, I said my motto was this: do what you can, not what you won't. Committing to 2 hours of running and yoga may sound great, But if you won't do it, it just leaves you feeling like a failure. Committing to 2 minutes of breathing may not sound like much, but it can change your life, and you can do it. So I want to end with a story about the effectiveness of small changes that comes to you from one of my dearest friends, Dr. Janet Quinn. And she's a nurse and a researcher and a wise woman. Janet wrote a fabulous book called I Am a Woman, Finding My Voice. And she had been invited to a big conference in Australia and had a week to spend with the Aboriginal people. One day, she was with a group of, there were Aboriginal women elders she was with, and they were going foraging for bush tucker, which is stuff to eat that you find in the outback. Little delicacies like honey ants and witchetty grubs. So it always depends on your frame of reference. Things have changed slightly in the bush because they were in a van foraging. And they were driving down the road, and all of a sudden the van slows down. Janet looks up, and what does she see but the behind of a large camel, which is right in front of the van. And here it is. The camel is just walking along. It's walking along, and the van is behind it. And so the driver goes toot, 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 and the camel goes, it's running down the road. And then after a while, of course, the camel slows down again. And the driver goes toot, 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 and the camel starts to move. And this goes on for hours. And as Janet is contemplating the derriere of the dromedary, she's thinking to herself, just look around here. As far as you see, there is a zillion miles of unmolested outback. But the camel is still on the road. If the camel were to make 1 degree of change in its course, just a little bit this way, pretty soon the camel would be free from the van, which is bothering it, and it would have a space of limitless possibility in which to roam. And that's the idea. It doesn't take an enormous change. You don't have to change your life 180 degrees to find inner peace and to find the sense of joy and love and community that you find when you come back into your peaceful center. It takes the smallest intention for change. And that small intention can really make an enormous difference, not only in your life, but in the lives of the people that you touch. Because maybe the best news is this: inner peace is contagious. So I want to thank all of you very much for coming, and I hope you'll find that one little change, that one little degree that you can make and add your sense of peace and joy to this very busy world. Thanks for coming.
Coming up next, a special bonus segment. Joan leads a guided meditation session and shares more stories about inner peace.
So first of all, thank you all for coming. There are 4 points that I'd like to make about meditation. The first point is everybody thinks their mind is going to stop, and it isn't. So you can let go of that thought. They think, oh, I'll focus, I'll be blissful. Everybody does this. And what will actually happen is you'll notice that your mind chatters a lot. So when that happens, just say, this is cool, I'm normal, and then let it go. Second point I want to make is that meditation is kind of like a mental martial arts, because what you're really doing is learning to get out of the way of your thoughts. They keep going, but you are able to step back and just come into a different part of yourself that isn't bothered so much by the thoughts anymore, and that's deeply restful. That brings me to the third point. And the third point is that there's actually a very specific physiology associated with meditation. And that has been termed the relaxation response. A researcher at Harvard, Dr. Herbert Benson, figured out it was the opposite of the body's fight or flight response. As you do this, your blood pressure is decreasing and certain hormones are increasing. For example, hormones that repair the body. So it's a state of deep rest, which is like sleep but different from sleep. The fourth point that I want to make is that you all already know how to meditate. You do it all the time. Joan, when you paint a picture as an artist and you're like incredibly absorbed in what you're doing, you lose track of time. That's a meditation. When you play the harp, Joanne, you lose track of time and you're absolutely absorbed and present with what you're doing, present moment activities. When you do your Pilates, Rob, it's the same thing. You attune to the feelings in your muscles and everything else disappears. Even if you're balancing your checkbook, it's a meditation as long as there's enough money in it. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to guide you through a meditation when the focus that you're absorbing yourself in is going to be your own breath. And in addition to the breath, you could choose a word or a phrase that might help you feel peaceful. So for example, as I breathe in, sometimes I like to say to myself, I am, and as I breathe out, peaceful. So the breath is almost singing to me, I am peaceful, I am peaceful. And all you need to do is close your eyes, and remember, don't worry about what you're doing. Your mind will wander, and when it does, you just gently bring it back. So just allow your eyes to close. And now begin to notice the flow of your breathing. Notice everything you can about how the breath comes into your body and how the breath flows out again. You might even notice your belly expanding as you breathe in, and then your chest and even your throat filling with air. And then how the body relaxes and lets go as you breathe out. Now as you do this, every breath allows you to notice a little bit more about it. And you can notice a little space between the breaths after you've breathed out and before the next breath comes in. It's like the little place when the tide turns and it's completely still there. Everything's out. New breath waiting to be born. And that's a peaceful center that you can find anytime. Now, if you like, you can add a phrase to the in-breath and out-breath. Perhaps, I am as you breathe in, and peaceful as you breathe out. Or any phrases of your choice. And when you notice that you're thinking, just notice, let go. Back to the breath. Resting in the little space, the gap between the breaths. And so now just notice whatever state your body and mind are in without judging either one. And you might want to take a little stretch, a couple of deeper breaths. And when you're ready, come on back and open your eyes. It's always a little hard to talk right afterwards. You look relaxed. Yes? Great. So I'm wondering if you have any comments or questions.
Well, Joan, I was wondering, what is the difference between meditating and spacing out?
That's a great question, because what meditation really is a form of awareness. It's a tuning in. Zoning out. If you ask someone, where are you? They say, don't know. Just like when you miss your exit on the turnpike. But the idea of meditation is that it makes you aware all day long, so that not only are you learning to focus in these few minutes that you sit, but in all the activities of your day.
What about images? Are they helpful? I had this wonderful image of a brook flowing down and becoming a river. And I found that to be really helpful to get me into meditation.
You know, you're an artist, Joan, and so the fact that imagery like that would come up is perfect for you, and it's just the way that your whole body-mind system works. A lot of people like to focus on an image itself. So if that's comfortable for you, and you can focus on the image of a brook, you can just breathe and be with that brook image. It'll work just fine. Well, thank you all, and I want to say just one more thing, and that is a meditation where you don't relax at all is just as great as a meditation where you do relax. And the whole point of it is that it trains you in awareness and letting go of your thoughts and being in the present moment. So don't judge your meditation. A meditation where all you do is bring your mind back from where it's wandering 100 times in 10 minutes is just as good as a meditation where you're really feeling peaceful. And you'll start to notice the benefits in all the other times of your life. And also you'll have those physiological benefits. Do you have trouble asking for help? I used to have a lot of trouble. I remember one day I was standing in the elevator with coffee in both hands. In fact, a whole tray of coffee that I'd volunteered to go get for everyone in the office. There were other people in the elevator, but did I ask for help? I pressed the button with my nose. There was an older woman in there, and she said, you know, dear, you better learn to ask for help. It's really important. And it is, because asking for help is something that not only gives you a more peaceful heart and some help in a busy world, but it's a kindness to other people. If you ask somebody for help, you give them the opportunity to do something that opens up their heart and makes them feel better. If you have trouble asking for help, here's a little exercise you can try. For the next week, 3 times every day, ask somebody for help even if you don't think you need it. Now here's a really neat thing. Ever ask for directions and you did need it, and you got terrible directions and couldn't get where you were going? With this exercise, even if you get awful directions, you already know where you're going, so you can't lose. But you do give a stranger an opportunity to be of help, which will make them feel better all day long. So it's easier than learning to play the piano. Learn to ask for help. One of the things that can be most upsetting is when something happens and we have a judgment about it and say, oh, I wish that didn't happen, it was a terrible thing. Or sometimes something really wonderful happens and we also have a judgment about it. Anytime we have a judgment that something is good or bad, as soon as something else happens, we lose our peace and we get upset. The fact is, life is always unfolding, and you never do know what will happen next. One of my favorite stories about this is about a Chinese farmer. One day, his horse runs away. Now, this is a terrible thing, you might think, because having a horse makes him a rich man. He has somebody to help him plow the field. All the neighbors come, they say, oh, terrible thing, you've lost your precious horse. All the farmer says is maybe. The next morning, his horse actually returns. It's got a whole herd of wild mustangs with it. All the neighbors come again and they say, oh, you're the richest man in China. What a wonderful thing. All the farmer says is maybe. The next morning, his only son gets up, gets on the wild mustang to break it, and is thrown. And instead the farmer's son ends up with a badly broken leg. This seems like a terrible thing because it's planting season and now there's nobody to help the farmer in the field. All the neighbors come again and they say, terrible thing, your son is injured. All the farmer says is maybe. The next morning when they get up, there's a big commotion in the town. And what's happened is the emperor's soldiers have come to conscript all the young men to go into a war. It's a terrible war because none of the young men has returned alive. But the farmer's son has a broken leg, so he can't go to war. All the neighbors come and they say, what a wonderful thing. This is great. Your son can't go to war. And all the farmer says is maybe. This particular parable actually continues for 500 more verses. And the idea is it terrible? Is it wonderful? We don't know. But if you just stay in your heart, in the place that says the world is full of possibilities that will always unfold, and unfold for the good if I hang in there long enough, you get out of worrying about whether a particular event is good or bad. So just remember to say, maybe.